Uxbridge in Focus is delighted to welcome you back to another segment of What Makes Uxbridge Tick. Speaking of vision, you know, we have so many talented and intelligent people that serve on a various number of boards and committees in this town. All of them come with their own vision of how to move the town forward. Today, Uxbridge in Focus is going to spend some time hearing from Ken Redding, our town moderator, about what his vision is. So please, let's take a walk across the bridge into the present and find out what the difference one person can make. Well, here we are with our town moderator, Ken Redding. Ken, thanks so much for taking time out of your day and spending time with Uxbridge in Focus and the people of Uxbridge to share with us your vision. The reason why I chose this setting for you and I to talk is it lends itself nicely to what Uxbridge is and what the vision is of the town. So, without further delay, can you just kind of give us a little bit of preliminary information about how long you've been town moderator, why you ran, and what compelled you to run?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Kathy, and thank you for taking the opportunity. I'm very delighted to take part in the program. Well, I've been town moderator. I was elected in 2002, so I'm halfway through my 3-year term at this point. Why did I choose to run? Well, first and foremost, it was because it was an empty seat. Jane Keegan had been the moderator in town for some 12 years and chose not to run for re-election. I thought she was doing a perfectly acceptable job, and had she chose to run for re-election, I would not have sought the office. However, it is an office that for about 30 years was a desire of mine to take on, and that goes back to the very first town meeting that I attended, where someone moved the question, and I became quite angry that the town actually chose to move the question when I had something to say. And of course, as a 20-something-year-old, emotions ran high, and I determined at that point that I wanted to learn the rules, and I did.
It's hard to imagine that someone would actually get angry at moving the question, but nonetheless.
It's a very emotional issue, and later on perhaps we'll chat about that, because it's one of the most difficult issues that I think we face at town meeting, knowing what it is and how to respond to it. But anyways, it's been an interest that I've had. As you probably know, I served as town accountant for 22 years, and giving up that position in 2001, would not have run for the moderator's job while holding another position in town. I don't think that's appropriate. I think the moderator really needs to be fair, impartial, removed from the local politics as best as you can do that. So having held a town position would not have been appropriate to seek the moderator's job. But giving up the town accountant's position, the stars fell into a line, and I decided to run for the office.
Now, when you actually made that decision, did you, obviously a lot of reflecting on what you wanted to do. What kind of vision did you have once you decided to go ahead and sign those campaign papers?
Well, now the moderator's job is really somewhat boring in the largest sense. When you look at what the statutory requirement is, it's to preside over the meetings and determine all questions of order. That's it. And above and beyond that, it's what individual moderators take to the position. There was really only one thing that I thought needed to be done differently at town meetings, and I've changed that. And that was this whole concept of, up until my tenure, the Finance Committee had always made motions before the town meeting floor. And that's okay as long as it's comes out as a positive motion. In other words, if you vote yes, you will do something. If you vote no, you won't do it. And the Finance Committee, if they happen to disagree with the premise of the article that was coming forward, had in the past made some negative motions and motions to pass over. And I didn't think that that gave sponsors of articles the proper opportunity to get up and speak on the merits of the article and put it into a more easily manageable article. So I've changed that, and now the sponsors of articles make the motions on their articles so that you have a positive motion on the floor. And I've refined that a bit over time to allow the sponsor to speak to the merits of the article, and then have at least one person speak to the other side of the issue before any motions to move the question are in order. So I think that's an accomplishment that I had in mind, and we've accomplished that. I've learned with the job, as we've had some very large meetings in my tenure, that there were a couple of other things that needed to be addressed, one of which was the introduction of voter cards, which I think helps to allow me to determine what the vote was. So sometimes with the yeses and nos, it becomes very difficult to know whether or not the minority opinion is just speaking louder than the majority opinion.
It's more accurate.
It seems to be much more accurate. The use of the voting machines at town meetings, I think, expedites the process of counting the secret ballots when we have those. It was a very drawn-out and tedious process before that, the paper ballots and having to send people off to a private room to count them up, and then what do you do with the people as that's happening? So I think that's a positive improvement. And then one lesson that we learned at a town meeting was that we now have 2 tellers assigned to each section of standing counts. And I think that was something we've never done in Uxbridge before, but as a result of responding to a problem we had at one of our town meetings, implemented that procedure. So I think you have to look at what's happening at the town meetings and get a sense of the flow of it so that it runs smoothly, that people have a feeling that what they're saying, they have the opportunity to be heard within the rules of the meeting, and that people leave that hall feeling as though that they've had a fair shot.
Now, so we'll say that those have been some of your goals, and you've been able to accomplish those goals. Do you have anything that you see down the future that you might want to implement, or do you feel that you really need to be part of the town meeting to see where changes need to occur?
Well, I think being part of it, if I had a magic wand and I could get every voter in town to come to a town meeting, well, first of all, it would be impractical to do so. In the back of my head, one of the things I'm thinking is that perhaps we've grown to the point where an open town meeting may not be the best form of government for us any longer, that maybe we ought to be looking at a representative town meeting. And I say that very reluctantly. I'm a product of an open town meeting. I like the ability where folks can go and speak their piece. And that's the vision, the ideal. But the practicality is that when you have 2,000 people, or nearly 2,000 people show up at a town meeting, that vision, that ideal can't be met. It's impossible to have 2,000 people have the opportunity to speak at the microphone. And by and large, at least it's been my experience, that when that many people show up, it's because they want to actually take the vote. And state law does not allow us to actually take those votes over a longer span of time. It has to be done at a town meeting. So that's a bit frustrating, and I've really been giving a lot of thought to the concept of perhaps we need to think about a representative town meeting where we'd have 200, 250, 300 people as elected representatives of town meeting members. And maybe that's a more efficient way to go. I don't know. There's pros and cons to each, but
You know what, that's a really interesting concept. How do you think you'd be able to even begin to implement that as a form of discussion, never mind it being a complete and fluid thought?
Well, it's difficult, particularly right now. We've just adopted a charter. The Charter Commission spent a lot of time looking at what the form of government should be and the open town meeting process. But that charter provision also requires the charter to be looked at least once every 10 years. So I guess this is probably something that would be a long-term goal, that perhaps over the next time the Charter Commission gets together to look at the pros and cons of the charter, that may be an area that they look at and spend some time at.
Do you think, though, that even though it takes 10 years to look at the charter, that we really have that much time? Because with the way the growth is occurring, I mean, it's clear that we're expanding ourselves. Maybe that might actually need to be revisited in and of itself.
That's possible. In fact, there's a provision in the charter that we're going to be looking at the next town meeting, where the current charter requires that 3 members of the Finance Committee be elected, and there's an article on this upcoming town meeting that would change that and revert back to the old philosophy where the town moderator actually appoints all members of the Finance Committee. And again, there are pros and cons on that, and I'm happy with however the town meeting chooses to go, but I'm not sure that half elected and half appointed is the right mix.
Which leads me up to my next question. At this point, at your year-and-a-half break, what has been the most difficult moment for you as the town moderator?
Actually, there are probably a couple of difficult moments. When I ran for this job, I thought that being the moderator, you could be fair and impartial, and that everybody obviously would recognize that. Well, I've learned that perhaps I was a bit naive in that assumption that no matter what you do, you can't please every person in that town meeting hall. So I think probably the biggest high is recognizing that most of the people are satisfied with the job that I'm doing. I think probably the downside, the issue, the areas where I've not been quite as optimistic or as pleased. We had one meeting where we took a vote on an issue, and then we took a recount, and the numbers changed between the first and the second. And I don't believe there was any wrongdoing going on. I think it's just simply that when you have, I think that meeting we had 500 or 600 people in the gymnasium, and it's awfully difficult to get an accurate count. And at that point we were only doing 1 teller per section, and I know that there were people disappointed on both sides of that issue because the first time the article passed and the second time it didn't pass. To me, it was not so much a question of whether the article passed or didn't pass, as it was trying to ensure that we had an accurate count and that when people left the meeting hall, they felt as though we did all that was possible to get as accurate a count as we could under the circumstances. But that was very disappointing, and in fact, that was the end of a very long meeting that started out with, I think, over 1,000 people. And that was the last article I think we dealt with that night. And just at that moment, I was about to congratulate everyone for what a wonderful job that we were doing, and that we had come together, with diverse opinions and with agreeing on some things and not agreeing with others, when this issue hit the fan and it became very divisive. And anyways, we've solved that problem, but it's not the one that I was pleased about, and it was a disappointment.
Well, that's just the spice of Uxbridge, I suppose. You never know what you're going to get, right?
Well, coupled with that, the other thing that is disappointing is that, again, I've said that I've tried to be fair, impartial, and to stay out of the local politics, and I think to a large extent I've done that. It's disturbing when it becomes personal, and it became personal. There actually was one person who called the bank that I chair the board of and complained that I was being unfair, and that called anonymously, and that if my actions didn't change, that this person was going to remove their account relationships from the bank. If people have a concern about my performance, I'm more than happy to meet with them. I've published my phone number, I've sent my email address out, I've given my home address for people to call me, talk about issues, and that was disturbing that didn't happen. And that's where I say when it gets down to that personal level, it's very disturbing.
It is, and it's disappointing.
It is disappointing.
It's very disappointing because we are supposedly adults, and we should be able to handle our differences. But so on the flip side of that, what is your highlight so far?
Well, it was, the very first meeting we attended had 1,973 people, and that was the first meeting that I presided over, and the adrenaline was really flowing on that day, and to control the crowd, I think, first of all, because again we were dealing with controversial issues. To control the crowd, to have everybody feel, at least the sense I got as people left the meeting was that it was a very well-run meeting. And I heard a lot of response from folks after the fact that they thought it was. That was exhilarating, and that's a big high. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why you like to be the moderator, because there are some highs involved in it. I'm not sure, I don't think it's for everybody. I must say that the moderator's job is significantly more difficult than I ever thought that it would be. And I have had, over the years that I was town accountant, I had many opportunities to speak in front of town meeting, and standing in front of the crowd has never been a problem. But making sure that you know all the rules and you're trying to observe the entire meeting hall and what's going on it's a challenge. It really is.
And overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. So were you nervous?
Actually, I wasn't, and I don't know why that is, but it was exhilarating. And I think the other really high point was I put together a presentation that we did to the high school seniors last year, Mrs. Puckett's group. And we went over, myself, the town clerk, and Mrs. Smith from the Board of Registrars, and we talked to these seniors about town meeting and why it was important and how we do things and why we do things, talked about the charter. And we had, I think there was probably 50 kids in this particular classroom. It was a joint double section classroom. And that was really exhilarating to see these kids and to get them involved and get them interested. We registered some folks to vote that day, and that's really what it's all about. It's getting people involved.
I mean, that's the nuts and bolts of what our government is.
It is
getting people to recognize how important that right to vote is and not to use it unwisely.
Democracy is a very difficult form of government. It's kind of messy, actually. And but it's also, well, some people, I guess the quote goes, it's the worst form of government in the world, except for all the others. And it's wonderful to be a part of it, to know that you have the opportunity to speak your mind, and that there aren't the police aren't going to be here to capture you if you do those kinds of things. And I think the right to vote is just an overwhelming right and responsibility, and if we can get kids in high school to recognize that and inspire them, that really is what it's all about.
Do you ever stop to realize that you're making history?
Well, not really, but I suppose, and you're right, we are. Everything we do is making history.
And you know what, that leads me to another question, especially about the town and the people and all of that. I know that you've lived here for a long time, most of your life.
All my life.
All your life, there you go. And I also know that you've known pretty much everybody in town. But at this point, where there's so much growth, I mean, at least more than half the town are new families that you probably don't know, have never met. How do you reconcile that intimacy that you've had with the town as opposed to what the town is becoming now?
Well, I guess me personally, I view every new person that moves in as a new opportunity to form another friendship. So, I'm very open. I like people. I love people. I think it's wonderful that they come in, they take a part. On the other hand, I'm not sure that some of the natives aren't a bit resentful that, and some of the change that it's being required and some of the growth that's happened. And there's a lot of folks that would like to have the town the way it was. I think that change is inevitable. I think that we need to respond to it. I think that we need to welcome folks that come into town. I think that we need to try to find out what their talents are and get them involved in the government. I think that's a wonderful thing. So, how do I reconcile it? I guess there's no reconciliation other than invite folks in and open with open arms to become part of our government to make the town better.
So how do you, I suppose you could use that as a form of dealing with some of the divisiveness that has gone on over the last couple of years, because it's clear that we're very divided. Where, you've got people at both sides of, or at odds with an issue, and like you said, it's gotten personal, sometimes dirty. How do we, or what's your vision of trying to change that and bring the collective groups together to keep that from everybody getting further apart?
Well, it's very difficult. I think democracy is really one of building coalitions, and I think it's one of people reaching out to one another. And I think that if we're ever going to be successful with whatever the project is, whether it's a school, whether it's some other issue, whether it's racetracks or whatever it is, it seems to me that we have to get folks to lower the degree of rhetoric and to get them working together. And I'm not exactly sure how to do that. But I think the first step is for people to come together and to chat and to talk and to do so in a way that's not hurtful, that's not personal, that's simply saying, look, we have these issues. And I may not have the answer to it, I may not have the solution, but collectively I think that we'll come to a solution. And that's really what I think is what's great about the democratic process. I love the democratic process, that I think over the long haul we will make the right decisions if you give the people the opportunity to become part of it, to vote, which is why, again, starting the conversation, if we could get every single person who's a registered voter in town, and those that aren't to become registered, to come to a town meeting or to get to the polling places and vote, nothing would make me happier.
How do you change that apathy, though? I mean, that's a long-running battle to get people to recognize the importance of that 5 minutes they might take when they go to that ballot. How do you change that apathy?
Well, I guess you have cheerleaders like me and you. And I think that people will actually come out to vote when it actually ends up impacting them. We don't. One of the issues I think that was with the school is that it hasn't impacted enough people, I guess, because we haven't come to a solution on how to address that issue. And I don't have any strong feeling one way or the other, which I guess again was one of the downsides that now thinking back is being accused of, quote, being one of them by both sides of the issue. Maybe that's an indication I'm doing my job, but it's hurtful when you're being accused of being one of them. But I think ultimately folks need to become invested, in whether that's because it impacts them personally or because they have a need, whether it be a street that they want to have paved in front of their house or a sewer line that they want run down their street. When it becomes personal to them in that kind of a way, then I think they'll become involved. And I don't have a good answer, Kathy.
I agree with you. I think it's when people begin to own it that it becomes real to them.
Said well.
That they want to go out and either change it or make it better. So I agree with you on that philosophy. And since we're talking about controversial things, let's talk about FinCom. Tell me some of the things that you feel FinCom needs to change, not needs to change. What's your vision about what you see in the long term as FinCom being for the town?
Well, the Finance Committee is a very difficult job. This is a group of 7 people serving without compensation. And my view of Finance Committee people are that they They need to take a broader picture. They need to stay out of the politics of the town, but simply they're advisory. They should be a group that's competent enough, that has the wherewithal to study the issues, understand what the problems are, and then recommend a solution or a course of action for the town to take. And by and large, I think they've done that. This past summer, there was an instance where 2 members of the Finance Committee chose to act independently, taking part in the 10 taxpayer lawsuit against the town. That I don't think was appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate for Finance Committee members to be doing that. I expressed that to the Finance Committee. I think that the group that we have are very dedicated, conscientious, knowledgeable people. I have no problem with anybody that's on that committee. I do, however, feel that if someone wants to take a personal agenda, that they want to act individually and not within the confines of the Finance Committee, and it's in a political way, then they really should not be on the Finance Committee. And I could have removed the 2 people. The power to appoint is the power to remove, or as some people would say, is the power to appoint is the power to disappoint. But we're not going to disappoint anyone. And I thought that would be very more divisive in the long run to do that. And I do think that the folks that were involved in that situation are good people, that their hearts are in the right place. They did what they thought they should do. I just don't think that they should have done it individually. I think that if the Finance Committee took a vote and said this is what the Finance Committee as a whole should do, while I may not agree with that, I think that would have been the course of action. But it was never discussed there, and I think that was wrong, which led us to led me to thinking about, well, how do you respond to that in the future? And I think the question of the Finance Committee and perhaps the Board of Selectmen and other boards, school committee perhaps, should devise some sort of a code of conduct, much like the U.S. Senate does. I mean, if a senator does something that's inappropriate, whether it's a violation of their rules, they don't throw them out of office, but they get censured. And the rest of the folks in the Senate say that the action that you took was inappropriate. And that's what I was hoping that would happen, that the Finance Committee, because I have some control there, would adopt rules that they felt would be appropriate as to what the legitimate roles were for folks acting when they're not sitting around the table as Finance Committee people.
Have they done that?
Not yet, but it's I did put the Finance Committee on notice. I mean, it's not that they don't have a lot to do. There's a lot on their plate, so this may have gone off the back burner. But as I indicated at the Finance Committee, it will be one of the criteria that I look at in appointing new Finance Committee members, that they share that view. And it's kind of the only litmus test that I'm looking at, other than the ability to understand and comprehend the gravity of the issues that come before the town. I think you have to have somebody who's open-minded, who's willing to devote the time, and has the capacity to grasp the issues. And some of them are very complicated. There aren't easy answers.
Well, it's not easy times, obviously. Let's jump back a little bit to town meeting. As you know, and as we've discussed, it's been very controversial at times and somewhat disruptive. What are you going to do, or what are you going to implement for the future to deal with those disruptions?
Well, looking back as to what causes the disruption, I go back to the thing that got me involved in the first place. It's the whole issue of moving the question. If I look back at every town meeting, the disruptions always have started because someone feels as though their right to speak was denied. And I think we solved that at the last town meeting. And the way we solved that was by having speakers' chairs. So that if you want to speak, I don't know what you're going to say, although I've been accused by at least one person of conspiring to plant speakers in the audience. I can tell you unequivocally that I have never conspired with anybody to say anything at a town meeting. But having said that, the idea of a speaker's chair or a speaker's row where folks that want to speak at the microphone can come down and sit, and when they get up to the microphone, it's their turn, and it's not a question of trying to recognize hands in the audience as to, I know one meeting where we had some disruption, I had someone off to my right that wanted to speak, and I didn't recognize them because I didn't see them. And then I had another situation where I told someone they could speak, but then someone who was in line moved the question, and that cut off debate, and then the person in the audience said, well, you said I could speak. And in many ways, my job is that of a referee, to establish the rules and enforce the rules. Not that I'm playing this favorite against that favorite. I really don't care who comes to the microphone or what they have to say, providing it's within the scope of the article and it's not, ranting and raving. I mean, you have to be on target and on point. But I think moving the question has been a very difficult thing, and my rule is essentially that if there's someone waiting to speak, If they wish to move the question, they can do so. But I'm not taking people yelling from the audience to move the question when there are people waiting to express their view, or even to get up and move the question. So I think ensuring that people feel as though they have the opportunity to speak within the confines of the meeting is the way to, at least, you don't avoid controversy, but you make the tone of the meeting businesslike and less confrontational. Now, having said that, I've also resolved that any further disruptions in the terms of outbursts or things of that nature, people are going to be removed from the town meeting. I've had it up to here with that it's not going to happen again.
So I know when Jane Keegan was moderator, she used to wear a hat. Do you think maybe we should get you a referee's whistle?
Well, that was one of the campaign things that I said, that, well, I love Jane, and I think that the hats were appropriate for her. I viewed town meetings as being really serious business meetings, and so I viewed the hats as, kind of a distraction from the business at hand, although she used it for comic relief and it worked effectively for her. I'm not sure that I would be able to pull it off as gracefully as she did. So no, I'll just have my gavel.
You know what, to end our discussion, you've lived here your whole life. As you look upon this beautiful scenery, where do you see us in 5-10 years?
Well, I think this is a growing community. It's a town that has many challenges, not the least of which is the fact that revenues are growing slower than expense needs are growing. So I think that we've got some real challenges to face. But I'm a basic believer in the human decency and goodness of people, and I think that we've got some absolutely terrific people in this town. I'm inspired by chatting with them. You meet folks in the street, you say hello. But I think it's a two-way street. You have to give a little bit to get a little bit back, and I hope that we can get beyond that people can learn to express the differences and come to some kind of a consensus as to what the right thing is to do. I'm hopeful that can happen, and I believe that we've got some really, really terrific people. So I really look forward to meeting more of them, and I think that together we'll solve the problems that this town has if people get involved.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, we appreciate your insight, your vision, everything that you've offered to us. I think it's important for the viewing public to know what you're about, what your vision is, where you stand, what you hope to see happen. So we really appreciate it, and we thank you very much for taking time with us.
My pleasure, Kathy.